Hey everybody, welcome to another meeting of the Research Triangle PowerShell user group. My name is Mike Kanakis and it is the 5th of June. And tonight we're going to be talking about automating the arduous task of testing network security. But before we do that, let me welcome in my co-host tonight. Hello, Phil. How are you?
I'm doing well. When talking to our speaker prior to and kind of getting prepping for it, I was super impressed with what he's going to cover, and I personally am looking forward to this. So it should be
Ye-
exciting.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, we've had a preview of our demo tonight, and we're pretty excited. This is going to be a good one. So let's welcome in our speaker for tonight. Let's say hello to Tony Giamelli. How are you? Hey, Tony, come on in.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Phil. How's everybody doing
Really
today?
Yeah,
good, good.
yeah. So, Tony, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
So what we're going to be talking about is something that used to annoy me for many, many years, and that is stuff I cannot connect to, or more specifically, stuff I cannot connect to, and then TLS is broken. The genesis of this module came way back when I was working on an extranet at a prior company. I'm going to say about 15 years ago, and I was working with a firewall person. We had servers behind said firewall, and ports were supposed to be open. Many ports, and those that have had to have Active Directory traffic through a firewall, know that there's a plethora of ports. And then if you add web servers, application servers, there's a bunch of stuff that should be open. And suffice it to say, I found it took weeks to just determine what was broken. It should have taken minutes, 10 minutes tops. But in any event, I was working with a firewall person who I saw doing connectivity testing using Telnet to one port at a time. And I heard about this thing called PowerShell from this guy named Don Jones, and I thought there must be a better way. So I developed my first PowerShell commandlet. And I consider these kind of like the macaroni pictures of PowerShell commandlets or PowerShell functions. And that is a port tester, a TCP port tester. So testing TCP connectivity. Now, as we know, in later years, testnet connection came on, and we were able to test ports with that. But I feel that this one has a lot more applicability toward testing at scale, either as a port scanner against a single node, multiple ports, multiple nodes, et cetera. And it also combines with some of the other commandlets in this module. And yes, I use the term commandlet for an advanced function for the people that are really neckbeardy about this. There's things in this module related to TLS, being able to just obtain TLS certificates from an endpoint, from a web server endpoint, paired with being able to determine TLS security posture from an endpoint. Some of you might have used the Qualys SSL server scanner to say, hey, how is my company's website looking in regard to TLS security posture? And that's all well and good from the outside, but wouldn't you like to test that stuff from the inside? Well, we have an answer for that. And then with all that, in my last organization, we ended up building a cloud solution largely in Azure, and there was a bunch of security tests that were failing from a product called Tenable. And we would see either ports open, or we would see HTTP response headers that shouldn't be missing or incorrect values. And from that point, I'm like, wouldn't it be great if I could also just grab HTTP headers to fingerprint a website? And then finally, and I'll be showing all this, and finally, I have one last function that I've written that effectively wraps the whatismyip.com API that allows me to geolocate an IP address. So if I see an IP address and it looks kind of weird, I can feed it into this function to determine where it is, what country it's in, what the ISP is, etc. And real quick, I noticed that somebody said my camera is not on. Should my camera be on? You said off, I think.
Oh,
I gave you the wrong information. I wanted you to turn it on when we introduced you. I'm sorry.
Got it. Okay.
Tony, we do like you. We do
yeah.
want to see you.
I got to fix my hair now.
He's just the man behind the voice. There you go. There he is.
There's an actual person behind this.
He's got some nice hair looking. It's really nice hair, but I don't know what that feels like.
Actually watched it tonight. All right, I'm going to move y'all down, and I'm going to screen share my top monitor. I apologize for people that like PowerPoint. I don't have a deck for this one. I know how much everybody loves slides, but the module will be very
so let me jump in there 1 second, because
sure.
I know exactly what you're going to present, but I'm not sure if everybody understands. So just to button this up, so you essentially handle network security and things of that nature, and you basically got tired of having to do all these tasks, and you wrote a module to sort of automate a lot of this stuff. So what's the name of your module and how they find it?
That module is PSTcpIp and I can throw it in. I have it on screen right now. I can on my other screen. I can throw it in the chat if needed.
Okay, so this is a module that's focused around being able to test various parts of the network to essentially check on how healthy security is in various aspects. And so that's what Tony's going to be featuring tonight. But there's a module that supports all this, and so I just want to make sure people understood the module itself. So, Tony, what's your background?
So my background is I've been in IT for, I want to say, 25 years at this point. Started off as a typical desktop person. Then I was told that server people make the most money, so I became a Windows NT server person back when. Got my MCSE, lather, rinse, repeat for 2000, 2003, 2012, so on and so forth. But along the way, back in 1998, I was at an organization that no longer exists that had what was called a security incident. I had no idea what a security incident was. I found out very, very quickly at that time. And my manager at the time, the director, said, how would you like to work on some security related things? And at that point, I started pivoting to cybersecurity before cybersecurity was a thing. So the last 3 organizations I had been at over the course of 2 decades plus, my role had basically drifted into these security specialist in application development, largely API. I'm allergic to front-end development, so API development, infrastructure, platform, and then eventually I became a security architect at my prior organization, and presently I'm a senior enterprise security architect at Point 32 Health in Canton, Massachusetts.
So the reason I asked all that is to qualify, to basically say, Tony knows what the hell he's doing. He's a really sharp guy. And when Phil and I went through this with Tony, he showed some really, really cool, interesting stuff. And I have a feeling Tony can go pretty deep, pretty fast if he wants to. So I would definitely sit back and enjoy the ride. So let me give the disclaimer for the people watching at home. We're going to watch a live demo here. Tony's going to share some knowledge with us about a module he built. But this is a live demo in front of a live audience over Teams. And so it's an interactive demo. And we encourage our audience to ask questions. And because of that, Tony may not end up in the spot that he thinks he's going to end up when he started planning his things. And so keep that in mind. We encourage people to join us at the next meeting so you can come and ask the questions in person. But at this point, Tony, I want to hand it over to you, and really excited to see what we have to share tonight.
Excellent. Can everybody see my screen? There should be a giant terminal and what looks like a dock.
Yes,
sir.
And if we're going to show code, we're probably need to make it bigger.
Make it bigger? Not a problem.
Yeah. So yeah, you'll want to make it bigger. Sure.
Let's go this route. So this is my default larger font profile. Let's go with, I'm going to bump it up to, that looks absurd. We're going to go, let's try 14. Phil, what do you think of that? If I were to do this as an example.
Is his screen frozen? I haven't seen any changes.
Yeah, it didn't change.
Yeah.
If it's just me, I don't see his screen at all.
So
let me stop and reshare.
Yeah, take your time, man. Kevin.
Let's try this.
Hold on. Ready?
Yes.
Yep.
Where did I put it?
Any luck now?
And here we go.
Yeah, that looks good.
Awesome. Take 2.
Better.
Okay. That's more better. Cool. All right. And it's also gigantic fonts, which is good. And I may have to pivot to Visual Studio Code for some examples that I may write. But in any event, starting from the beginning, simple TCP port scanner has some things that other port scanners may not have, but this is really the basic, the first thing I want to demonstrate because it underpins the vast majority of the module. So, here's my disclaimer. When I was researching how to demonstrate this sort of stuff, I didn't get a chance to stand up a lab, so fortunately a good friend of mine who I've worked with for many years was kind enough to let me do this against his site. Legality and all that sort of stuff. If you are port scanning or doing various things, make sure you have the permission of the party that owns the resources you're hitting. In other countries, people have gotten arrested, believe it or not, as absurd as it sounds, for port scanning. I know that sounds ridiculous, but this is one of those do so at your own risk type things. Yes, this is around security testing, but yes, I have used this in penetration tests. So as a reconnaissance tool, it works quite well. Okay, so from the beginning, we're going to go with the first function, which is test TCP connection. And I put the link to the module in the chat. The README is very, very involved. There's a lot in there. And also every function, if you run get help against it, has comment-based help, tells you what the parameters do, what they don't do, etc. So let's start from the beginning. I have a target, and that target is this website, november4th.io. So I'm expecting X ports to be open, and I'm going to test them. So let's go out of the gate with, I'm going to do this longhand right now. I'm going to test making sure that port 443 is open on this site. Not terribly exciting, not terribly different than testnet connection. But versus testnet connection, which I'm going to pick on for a second because I don't really understand why they made some of the design choices they did, I can test 2 ports. So that I can see 80 and 443 are listening, which is useful. But you know what? I want to make sure that 22 is not listening, but I want those other 2 listening. So this is good. This is expected behavior. I can see that it is not listening on 22. That's positive. It is listening on 80, which we're going to redirect to 443. So far, so good. Now, longer way of doing this, if I wanted to hit a target and determine what's open aside of me just throwing port after port after port, simply put, and this is that situation where it takes a bit. So I had to, while everybody was talking prior, I set up this part of the demo. I run the same command again, and I just want to see what's connected. I don't care about all the failures, but I use the where connected switch with no port. So what this is going to do, it refers to a text file that's within the module, and that text file has some default ports. And this was, I want to say, inspired / stolen from the port list. The default port list I'm using was from Rapid7, Tenable, Nmap, and some stuff that I was interested in for Kubernetes specifically. If I'm looking for open API endpoints on Kubernetes, which I could talk to you guys about that offline if you want, because that's its own topic. But suffice it to say, if you run it with no arguments, it will do a default port scan of many, many ports. Now, in this case, I only care about what is connected. So where connected, show it to me. I don't want to see a million falses, because if I were to do the same thing, and we're going to remove where connected, and I'm not going to assign it to a variable anymore, it's going to do this. And again, you're doing this, please get permission of the person or the party that owns the target that you're doing this for, because there are potential legal implications. Port scanning in and of itself is a gray area. So this is the default port scan, and you're going to start to see it kick off, and if not, we can pivot to another thing and just come back to this window. But this is going to test for typical ports for connectivity, RDP, SSH, SCP, Kubernetes API ports, SIP ports, a whole host of things. And then from this point, this is helpful if you're a penetration tester and you want to fingerprint an endpoint to make the determination of what is this thing. So I've been told in places I will not speak of that, yes, that I had permission to do this. Oh, that's a Linux node. Okay, it is. So when I'm port scanning it, why am I seeing TCP port 3389? Why am I seeing 5985? Why am I seeing 636? Why am I seeing these things that are usually like either an Active Directory domain controller, a Windows server with WinRM, PowerShell remoting, RDP, or whatever else? So this is one of those things that it's good to determine. So we can say just dump the whole thing out at once. We have a bunch of faults. So this is my default list, and it's going to resolve the port name to the actual service in and of itself. There's, if you want to geek out on this stuff and the underpinnings of this specific command, there's a JSON file that resolves the numeric port to a specific service name. And some of it's like a best guess. So 1025 is Microsoft Teradata. Everybody who's worked with SQL knows that 1433 and 1434 are SQL, so on and so forth. But in this case, if I don't use the where connected switch, it's going to dump out an entire list. To that end, you're going to see some duplicates because something like MongoDB, as an example, is going to have multiple ports, etc. So that's this in a nutshell. And if you look at the README, what you're going to see is that there's the ability to, now I'm hitting a specific, I'm hitting just one target, but test TCP connection, if we look at the help on it, which I will put on screen to make sure I actually wrote this help correctly. I want to go, we can see that the main parameter for the DNS host name, so the thing that you're hitting, which can also be an IP address, by the way, is an array of strings. Ports are an array of integers. So it can be many to many. So I'm scanning all these DNS servers. Sorry, I'm scanning all these DNS records or this collection of DNS names against one port. I'm looking for, say I'm looking for NetBIOS. I want to find anything that has NetBIOS and shut it down for whatever reason. Or I'm looking for something that has 6443. So I can hit a bunch of targets, either IPs or names, against that one port, or I can basically hit a bunch of nodes against many ports and generate a report from that telling me what is and what is not connected. Now, I'm going to defer to Phil and Mike, but I would think at this point, if anybody has any questions, I'm willing to take them on this, because after this, we're going to start getting into more of the deeper aspects of the module.
Well, so I had, your timing's perfect because I had a question. I was going to ask not so much about what you were doing specifically with the module, but, I don't have a security background, right? I'm an infrastructure guy. So, like, walk me into how you get started with this. So, are you sort of like, hey, I'm curious about this target or this site. Let me just mine as much information as I can. Or do you usually attack it from like, and I guess it could be both, like, hey, I'm concerned that this site has too much open. Let me figure out what's going on there so I can shut it down.
Let's go this route. And I apologize, I didn't have the time to go into Azure and set up VMs to do this, but let's go this route, Mike. So you're familiar with Active Directory domain controllers, right? Are you familiar with some of the TCP ports, that some of the services that a domain controller needs to be listening on? Like if somebody's
as long as you don't ask me to recite them right now, sure.
No, you need to know all of them for the answer to that. In short, let's pretend we're not using info blocks, and let's pretend for sake of the argument that we're expecting and this is just a few of them, I don't know all of them either, trust me, but like we'll go with, I have a domain controller, it is behaving strangely, something is weird. I'm expecting TCP port 53, TCP port 388, TCP port 389, 636, somebody tell me the global catalog one, blah, blah, blah. So one thing you can do is, and you're setting up these domain controllers and say a disaster recovery environment. So let's just pull this out of cybersecurity for a second. You're working in an organization, you have a contract with SunGuard, you need to spin up your DCs. And before you start having, so that's like your tier 0, I need like the basic infrastructure ready to go. And I need to make sure that that stuff is up and running. What I've seen in DR tests is that like these, these are effectively like rehearsals, dress rehearsal for the real big bad thing. Is, all right, DCs are up, ready, set, go, and then the applications try to connect to them, and then you're seeing a pile of errors here, there, and everywhere else. Something got stuck, something didn't go through a firewall, something you have port blocking on a specific router or whatever, or you don't have an access control list that's allowing something through, whatever it is. So pulling this away from security for a second, which is this whole thing started from a functional perspective. I am expecting X behavior on X target. And that behavior is, I'm expecting these ports to be open. Forget the negative for a second. I'm expecting these ports to be open. So big, long topic, test-driven development. If y'all don't know Pester, you got to learn that stuff yesterday. But what I would do is wrap this in a Pester test. And I've done this at my prior organization saying, I'm expecting this to have, I'm expecting these things, I'm asserting that these things are true, that it's listing on these ports, that it has this, that, and the other. And if I get failures, do not pass go, do not collect $200, you're done. Go and remediate before moving to the next thing.
Okay,
that's one example, like.
So in your example, it's sort of like a verification that services are as expected, but it could also be reconnaissance if I just want to know what's going on with a box. But so it's like an info gathering event. Let me just see what comes back. And this module is essentially there to make it easy to collect all this data. And then from there, you take it to the next step, which is where you're going now.
Which is, and wrapping it into Pester and making it so that so the beauty of PowerShell, as we know, is that like, I find that when I'm trying to explain PowerShell to people, I've seen people interview people on PowerShell. I want to just pivot slightly and talk about this. PowerShell obviously can be run, most of you know this, in an interactive context and a non-interactive context. I really believe the power of it, though, is in automated testing. Now, as we can see, I'm running this on Linux. This is PowerShell 7, which is a requirement of the module, just so everybody's clear. I can put this stuff in a container. I can write my tests. I can have automated testing telling me what stuff should be. And that's really where something like that would come into play. So like this was initially developed because I'm spending weeks on end. We have 27 to 30 servers in a DMZ. That's the number that I remember for some odd reason. X amount of years ago, I'm told, it's up. I don't know what to tell you. And I go to this guy's desk, and nice guy, but he's Telnet server IP port 53. I'm like, oh, it's off. I'm like, he fixes that. And then it's like, I'm expecting 389, I need 636. And this, I was getting a lot of exercise going back and forth to this guy's desk until I said, I'm going to write something that's going to do that. And out of the gate, I want the many. So I have a spreadsheet, a CSV, an Excel spreadsheet that I turned into a CSV at the time, and basically say, here are my targets, here are my ports, and now I'm running this as I did before against that CSV, determining are these targets live, creating my own CSV saying yes, no, maybe so. In most of the cases, stuff was out. So in a single line of PowerShell, which was pairing test TCP connect with import CSV, test TCP connection, and export CSV, I was getting like a full-on analysis of why stuff was breaking. And that's not security. This is pure stuff is not working. I'm telling you why it's not. And what I found with I had a very brief network background in 1998, 1999, but what I realized as a Windows Server person, which is where I started with all this stuff, the more data you can give to somebody, to a network person, as to why stuff is broken, the easier both of your lives are going to be.
Sure. Okay, so it really speeds the gathering information and verification of services, along with doing lots of other stuff. Okay, so that makes sense to me. Thank you for the lead in there.
And one thing I'd encourage people to look at the README for the next thing. I unfortunately can't demo this. I'm going to talk about it, but I'm assuming there were some people in here that have used the Active Directory PowerShell module. There's a commandlet called getADComputer. So what's super fun about test TCP connection, the parameter name, as we can see, is sorry, that's my next part of the demo, DNS hostname. When you execute getADComputer and you're pulling computer objects back, it's going to return you a property called DNS hostname. So I'm binding to that value by property name or whatever it is. So one of the things that I've done is I'm expecting these servers to either have or not have a thing. getADComputer, pipe to test TCP connection, just straight away pipe to it. I'm testing against these ports. And again, because it's binding to this, the command would effectively look something like getADComputer, filter, blah, and then pipe to test TCP connection against a specific port. If I'm looking for something, I'm expecting this or not expecting this. That's this, and this is well documented in the README. There is integration with the Active Directory module. I just saw, I know, Mike, you said you were going to field questions coming in, but here's the thing I want to address. getAD domain controller is different. It doesn't return DNS hostname. So what I have done is, and I really wish I could bind by a different property name, but when I'm using getAD domain controller to pipe to this, I have to pipe to 4H object first. So basically 4H object is the intermediary between getAD domain controller, if I'm saying it correctly, and test TCP connection. Then I bind off the hostname parameter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's just a failure of the commandlet not returning the same property name, and that's the property there problem.
Yeah.
So
between the two, and I would exactly, Robert Simons, I think, just said that. And the thing is, I was going back and forth with what do I want the parameter name to be, right? Like, what do I want it to be? DNS hostname or what? But I do a lot with DCs. But the reality of it is, if I was looking, I was 60 to 70% doing more with getADComputer than it was getAD domain controller. So I had to, I had to make a decision. I had to, draw the line in the sand somewhere. One other thing I want to talk about in regard to this, for those of you that are Linuxy and don't like the verbosity of PowerShell, if that's a word, I use aliases for everything, for all the advanced functions that I write. So test TCP connection shorthand can be abbreviated to this, TTC, and we have the DNS hostname parameter is H for host, and what is it? Number fourth.io, sorry, and P for port. So there's also shorthand versions of these things as well. And as we can see, it's returning source address, which is useful information because if you have a multi-home computer and you're able to get to something or not, you want to know what you want to know where you're leaving from. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Now we're going to build on this. So that was the boring port scanning demonstration, because what comes next is a lot more interesting, at least in my view. So I'm going to look at this I'm going to speak to this, Mike, based on your feedback from the cybersecurity perspective, as well as the stuff is broken perspective. So I'd love to see the virtual show of hands if it's conceivable. Who here has had issues with TLS certificates expiring? Because that seems to be something that has pained, maybe it's just me and I'm completely cursed, but I have had issues with TLS certs expiring for an eternity Furthermore, what I've also experienced is that tooling, not to mention names from certain companies, well, we have a tool like, I'm going to mention them, Sectigo, Key Factor, AppUX, this, that, the other, and they're going to tell me where all my certs are and solve all of my problems. And while those tools are good, getting those to work at scale is very, very difficult. And sometimes it's like I need to take a peek at something really, really quickly to ascertain if it's good or bad. So I'm going to build on top of this command, but then I'm going to show it to you in isolation. So at this point, hold on, let me redo this. So at this point, I'm scanning a target or set of targets, and I want to determine if it's listing on 443, and it is. And if it's listing on 443, what I want at that point is I want the certificate on the target. This is a command called get TLS certificate. What it does is return an X509 certificate to. So in .NET, my God, I will not remember the namespace now that I'm on camera saying this. System.security.cryptography.x509 certificates is the namespace in .NET. This is returning a .NET object, X509 certificate 2, from the target endpoint. And that's useful if, like we're seeing on screen right now, okay, I'm getting the thumbprint, whoop-de-doo, that's not terribly useful. I want to know when this thing's expiring. So I need to tell my friend, hey, dude, your cert is expiring on so your issuer is GoDaddy, your certificate is, okay, it was issued, if I'm reading this correctly, not before as the issuance date. That was November of last year, and it lives for a year, so he's got plenty of time. It's going to expire after Thanksgiving, and all is well. .NET type in and of itself, there are certain things you can do with this. It's obviously returning the public key only. Now, we're going to take this a step further. So same command, get that, and I don't know who thought of this first. I'd like to say it was me, but it might not have been. I want to talk about a very practical usage for what I'm about to show. So I'm going to pull in the entire chain right now. And the chain, if you understand on PKI, there's what's called an end entity certificate or the leaf certificate, which I'm going to run the command again. That's the end entity certificate. And again, because of the way PowerShell presents it, you want to see all the things and stuff off of it. You're going to use select object, pull everything back. Okay. So this is the end entity certificate is looks gets hung up on me right now for whatever reason. Nope, we're good. The identity certificate has a thumbprint of this, that, and the other, and it's showing you the subject. Now, that's all well and good, but what I really need to do is determine what the issuing authority and the root authority are. I want to go up the chain. So to that end, I'm going to hit this and see, I can see the end entity certificate, the issuing authority, and the root certificate, all three of them. Now, if I want to take a peek at, all I care about is the subject and expiration. So I'm going to go subject, I'm going to go not after, not before, pull those guys in, and I'm going to see the subject of the end entity certificate, the issuing authority, and the root authority itself. And we can see that the expiration dates get progressively longer as we're going up the chain. Mike, I'm seeing hands being raised. Can I start to answer those questions?
No, that's your question before. Don't worry about
it. Okay. Excellent. Oh, I am seeing something from Andy that's saying, let me just address this for a second. Cannot start job. Like to move the session is incompatible with system language. PS7 4.2. And I want to touch base with you on that after this because I've installed and tested this on Mac OS, Windows 10, Windows 11. This is a Irish Linux distro called Zorin. It is awesome if anybody's looking to get into Linux. I've also installed this on Ubuntu, Kali Linux, and whatever else. But offline, I want to be super clear. I will be very, very, very glad to via email or LinkedIn or whatever to address any issues that you're seeing with it. Okay, and to go back to get TLS certificate for a second. So again, this is the longer fancy command where I'm taking test TCP connection, piping it to get TLS certificate, piping it to select object. But let's just eliminate all that stuff because we already know that our target is listing on 443. So at this point, I just want to call it directly, right? So I'm going to say, I think I have a URL for a hostname, nov4.io. So I have a hostname parameter. I also have, and this is very different, a URI parameter. I'm pretty sure this isn't illegal yet, to that terrible site called Facebook. So I can hit a URL, and again, the include chain switch parameter is still there for that, so we can see that. And also, you know what? I need to grab an IP address for a second. Give me a moment. I can also do it based on IP address. And this is not a small thing, at least it is not to me, and I want to explain why it is. Let me just run this first to make sure I'm not lying to y'all. All right, so I can pull it from an, okay, it's not able to pull from that because why? Oh, because it's resolving to something different. Okay, you can take my word for it. Well, let's go this route. Let's try something different. There we go. So the IP address one is interesting because I've got, this was actually something I had to work on, and I wanted this for a very specific reason. That specific reason was we would get reports from Tenable that would basically say, you have all of these self-signed certificates across this IP, that IP. So I get this monstrous Excel file. And I believe that, yeah, back in the day it was Tenable. I got this like maybe like 5 to 10 years ago. I got this massive Excel file that gave me IP addresses. It didn't give me host names. It's like IP address, self-signed cert, IP address, self-signed cert. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to take me eternity to go through. So I wanted it to take, and it was way harder than what it needed to be, honestly, for it to take an IP address, an actual IPv4 address. And what I was able to do was scrape the, so shout out to Doug Fink, import Excel module. It's awesome. If you haven't used it, please do. But I was able to, instead of doing import CSV, I was able to use Doug Fink's module, import the Excel straight away. So import Excel with the function import Excel, pull in the Excel file, get all of the IPs that are coming in, determine if they do in fact have a self-signed certificate. I'm going to show you a way faster way of doing it than this. That's the end state of this. Determining if they were, then using add member to write a last column on the newly created CSV or Excel spreadsheet that I was producing to say, you're right, you're wrong. And I think my hit ratio on that was like, I found that it was 70% wrong. So when we are talking about security, a lot of times that people who cited the fact that like they think cybersecurity is, I'm going to lock everything down because I want to make it secure. What we don't want to do as cybersecurity professionals is chase ghosts. Because if you're spending time on something that isn't a real risk to your organization, you're not spending time on the thing that you should really be looking at. So what I like about this module is it elucidates truth very, 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 very quickly. And in that case, I was able to show that some of the data that was coming out of an earlier version of Tenable was not in fact accurate. So it's not just looking for security things and saying, yay, I found something bad and now I can point my finger at you. It's basically sussing out false positives to make the determination, this is not accurate, I'm not going to spend time on this. Does that make sense? Good so far?
Yeah.
Ready for the next one?
Yeah, we're good.
Awesome, man. Keep going.
Awesome. So that's test TCP connection. That's get TLS certificate. Now, what I ended up realizing, I'm gonna go back to that view one last time of this guy here. So I'm gonna go back to just pulling a TLS certificate. His site is really hanging right now, which is a little odd. Select star. So I look at this, and let me just clear my screen and go again. I look at this and say, all right, this is cool. I can see when the cert expires, and that's all very, very exciting. And then I can see who if it finishes. Trust me, this is not me because I've already do this to something else. Let's put up the window for a second. Get out of Z shell. I'm gonna go to, let's just go to Google. So I'm gonna go to Google one more time, not Goggle. I'm gonna go to Google, and I see a cert, and let's pretend I work at Google. I do not, and I'm seeing, okay, it has a cert, it's issued by this authority, this, that, and the other. Is it expired? No, it's today's date and whatever else. And that's all well and good. But if I needed to hit a bunch of things at scale and make the determination that these nodes that are running TLS do not have self-signed certificates, are not expired, are not have the appropriate issuer, etc. If I were to do that with this alone, I'd have to write a PowerShell script that would do some calculations. So I'd have to, and I want to be super clear, I'm the absolute worst with data objects in .NET and PowerShell. Back when I was a C# developer, I was bad at them then. I'm bad at them now. But basically, if you're trusting my logic to determine is this date like not expired, you're in a world of hurt. So I got tired of that. And I like Booleans. I love Booleans. I like true false. I love true false. Love true false. So I look at that and I'm thinking, I want a quick way to tell me if this thing is expired, if this cert is expired or not. And paired with that, I want the ability to determine what the TLS levels are. So yes, we have TLS against this endpoint, but are you, the person who set it up, a bad person who's running an older version of SSL? Are you running TLS1 when Microsoft told you you should not? Are you TLS 1.2 or higher, or do you get a cookie because you're TLS 1.3? So I want to determine a bunch of things in a single fell swoop. I don't want to have complex logic and scripts. I want the data, and I want it then. What I want is this. I want to determine what ciphers are being negotiated, what, are they weak ciphers, strong ciphers. I want to determine the TLS versions. I want to determine if the certificate is expired. I want to determine if it's self-signed. I want to determine if it verifies. And when I say verifies, and I will remember 3 of the 4 steps, when we are talking about a .NET certificate object, there's a method off of it. Let me just bounce back here for a second. So I'm going to say cert. So I've got cert in a variable now, and cert has members and properties off of it. One of those members is something called verify. It's a Boolean. It tells me true. It's not terribly exciting. There's a way to test out the specific way you want, the specific validation methods outside of the verify method. But what verify does, if memory serves correct, is determining if the cert is expired, determining if it's from a trusted issuer, determining if it's properly signed, which is different than the trusted issuer, and if it has a krill on it, or like it can access a krill. So it's 4 specific steps. Ray, you have a question, I believe.
Yes, I was. You had mentioned earlier that you could use the tool to basically run a query similar to SSL Labs, just to basically do a scan on certs and stuff along those lines. Is that a built-in thing, or is it just calling different levels of commands to get the same type of report?
Different commands. I'm getting to that right now. So
okay, thank you.
My long exposition to say that get TLS certificate was not satisfactory enough, and I created this thing. So same premise as before, and we can pipe the results of test TCP connection to it. But this is my pride in joining the centerpiece of the module. The rest of it, quite honestly, is useful things. But this is the thing that has done wonders for me. And I want to be super clear about this before I show this. It's called get TLS information. I can scan an entire subnet. So you know how you guys know this little, I want to say, trick in PowerShell, right? Enumeration. What I can do is basically build an entire IP subnet using that. So I basically say I have a subnet of like 10.2. blah blah. I'll build, just using bare bones PowerShell, I'll use enumeration to build an entire IP address space, and then feed that into test TCP connection. Then I feed it into this. And you know what? We'll do the whole trip right now. So I'm going to hit my friend's site again. Where is he? Yep, he's there. He's right there. So we're going to just, again, I want to put this command on screen again. Oh, hold on. Target is not defined. Give me a second. Target. There we go. All right. So it's listing on 443. Now I'm going to pipe this to something called get TLS information, not certificate. And that does this. So my friend tells me, or if I'm a pen tester or I'm evaluating security on a website, whatever it is, they're telling me, oh, yes, we only have TLS 1.3 or higher. We have CBC. We don't have CBC ciphers. We have GCM ciphers only. And we're absolutely not using self-signed certs. And we have a proper issuing authority. And his site is bombing right now. So we're going to pivot to something else very quickly. Second. What happened there? What are you doing? Close you. I don't want to, I want to close that window. Let's just use our friend Google. So, I'm bringing this up to screen. So this is my attempt, and I want to be clear, I don't have the grading for this, time allowing, which time has been a scarce commodity for me nowadays. I'd like to figure out how the Qualys SSL Labs did the grading. So for those of you who haven't seen it, if you go to Qualys SSL server test and hit your company's website, you have the option of hitting a checkbox saying, don't show this message on the board. It will show you all of the stuff, but then it will give a letter grade, like an A+, you did good in school, F, you're terrible, or whatever it is, and everything in between. green for good, red for bad, yellow for like somewhere in between or whatever it is. I don't have the grading system. However, I'm capturing very, very similar information. So I'm hitting my target, just making a bare bones SSL call. I'm determining this is the host name, this is the IP port. So I'm just feeding back some basic information. Now I'm getting things that get TLS certificate, very, very similar to SSL Labs. Now I'm getting information that you saw from get TLS certificate. However, I'm breaking it out in a way that makes it easier for me if I were to run a query against this after the fact using where object, which is like, I mean, where object is seriously one of the best things in the default PowerShell module. I would determine, hey, okay, so we can see by this date that it's not expired, but you know what? Just tell me if it's expired. Certificate is expired. It is not expired. Certificate verifies. That method I ran before, the verify method, that's here. So if I were to scan an entire subnet or my entire company space and basically say, you know what? Run test TCP connection, all these nodes, pipe it into get TLS information. Where certificate verifies as false, give me this information back. Select this, that, and the other. So in short, let's go back to my friend's thing for a second. I don't know. I want to make sure that his is actually working because then I can do the more interesting stuff. Yeah, there he is. So say this was multiple hosts, and I would do something to the effect of where certificate, and for those that don't know, I'm sure many of you do, but if you don't, I don't want to talk above your heads. Question mark is an alias for where object. So what I'm doing, I'm going to break down this command. I'm hitting this target that I defined prior, which is November 4th.io. I'm testing it. I'm determining that if it's connected off of 443, and if it's connected, where it's connected, throw it back to the pipeline. I'm getting the TLS information off of that. And now what I'm saying is where certificate is expired, return me the host name, the IP address, etc. But we know that that's not the case here because I'm looking at it and I can see that it's not expired, but we could do something to the effect of if I wanted to have a quick report where certificate expired is false, then I would get that back. But at this point, so I'd have a report of expired certificates and I'd have a, oh, by the way, the great candidate for Parallel, Jeff Hicks, said the same thing if we're talking about test TCP connection. Get that. I am willing to accept a PR on that if it works. The variable scoping for that was crushing. So me and a good friend of mine, by the way, Mike, that was the guy that you met at the conference. We basically just cut bait on it. Jeff Hicks gave me some fantastic suggestions for certain things in the module in regard to the way that I should be doing default parameter sets, parameter binding order, this, that, and the other. But the parallelization, easier said than done. I'm willing to accept a PR from somebody that's going to do it. I'm going to be straight out honest. I'm not doing it. The variable scoping for that was crushing and we could not get it to work, but I will willingly accept the PR if it passed tests. And by the way, I passed your test for the module itself, both security tests and typical linting stuff. Yeah, but in any event, back to this, I am scanning a subnet against a port, finding if they're listening on 443, or it could be 4443, 6443, 8443, whatever. Obtain the TLS information. If the cert is expired, so look, I don't have to do date logic now, and neither do you. You don't have to say, well, if the date is greater than or equal to today or whatever, to hell with that. Just, is the cert expired? That's all I care about. If so, give me the targets. And then pipe that out to a file for reporting, whatever else. So we can also see, if we look back to the center of the screen, on top of getting thumbprint, subject, issuer, is this an issuer I approve of? Do we like GoDaddy? Do we not like GoDaddy? I expected DigiCert. I expected that. We want to make sure we might have a specific, in our organization, we might have a very specific list of approved issuers. Are we using strong ciphers? Which in this case, there are strong ciphers. He's using AES 128, should be 256, whatever. And he's TLS 1.2 or higher. So what we can see is there is no SSL2. There's no SSL3. These are very good. TLS is TLS 1.0. TLS 1.1 is 1.1, so on and so forth. So this to me looks like a good footprint. I would basically say that this would, if I were to give it like a cursory grade, it feels like an A. Gut feel is this would be an A. So I may or may not come up with a grading system in the future. I am seriously considering it. But in any event, yeah, that's get TLS information. So that's test TCP connection, get TLS certificate. So to recap, TCP, test TCP connectivity, does what it says, one-to-one, many-to-many, many-to-one, one-to-many, targets to ports. Get TLS certificate, you want a cert and you want the chain, that's where you go. Oh, I apologize, I forgot something. I need to pivot to a second module. So I'm gonna, you know what, I'm gonna put that in the chat as well. Give me a second. Actually, the presentation that Phil put in prior, that's my PSJSON web token module. Massive topic in and of itself. Watch it at half speed. I was trying to basically cram a 90-minute presentation into 45 minutes. JWTs is its own topic. There's a specific function that I need from there. And I really, really, really need this function for this demo. So I have an example of this on my README, what I'm about to show. And I have a required statement for JSON web token. So this has happened many times. Somebody tells me, I have this Linuxy appliance, and this Linux appliance needs a certificate chain in PEM format for this endpoint because your endpoint is using Active Directory certificate services to issue certificates, not a publicly trusted authority. I would basically, I'm betting way more than me on this call has experience with that sort of thing. So I need the cert chain, but I need it as a PEM. So like PEM is base 64. So let's go this route. So let's pretend, for sake of the argument, that my friend's site is not publicly trusted. So stepping through it again, I'm going to do it one at a time. We get the cert, yay us. That's cool, but I need the chain. Okay, that's cool. I don't need the end entity cert on my system that's supposed to consume services from this endpoint. What I need is the issuing and root authority. We're going to bring in our friend select object, and I'm not going to type select object. I'm just going to type select, and I want the last two. So now I have the two certs in the chain, and they're .NET objects. How do I get these to text? I'm glad you asked. We're going to, and this is from the PSJSON web token module, and I demonstrated this a year ago, something very, very similar. I have a function in there called convert X509 certificate to base 64, which does exactly what it says. It converts an X509 certificate to base 64. So now I do that, and I have the entire chain. I'm going to be a little persnickety for a second. If memory serves correct, Linux systems like ASCII encoding for whatever reason. So I'm going to say cert chain.crt, and I'm going to go encoding of ASCII. So in this whole mess, what I'm doing is I'm hitting a target, I'm getting the TLS certificate from it, include the full chain. I only care about the last two. I don't care about the end entity certificate. Now I have my .NET objects. I'm going to serialize them to base 64. I'm going to outfile them to ASCII encoding. And it's going to look like this. Now, if I look at the cert chain, we can see that it's produced the issuing and root certificate. And then we can export this on our Linux systems. Any questions?
I was just going to mention earlier, when you get a chance to go back and look at the chat, there's a few gentlemen that are willing to take on the task or possibly help out with your parallelization stuff that you mentioned you could use some help with. So
awesome.
Smart individuals. The beauty of user groups, you know, put it in front of people. So we'll keep on going.
Yeah, fantastic. Provided it works, provided it passes. Like I'm saying this, I'm skeptical but hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic. If we can speed it up, that would be absolutely fantastic. But I think the one that really needs to be sped up and one that could benefit from parallel processing or for each object parallel job, whatever you want to do, would be test TCP connection. So yeah, love to see it. And yeah, Graham put the PSJSON web token module in. So that this came from convert X509 certificate to base 64 came from that. Make sense?
Yep.
All right, this one took a little while. So this is the whole like cooking show thing where you have it like cooked ahead of time and then you show people. I didn't want you staring at my screen for 5 minutes. I don't think you're going to be able to make this one that quick, but if you can, cool. I wanted DNS enumeration. I'm not going to use the term brute forcing, especially if this is going on YouTube. I'm not brute forcing. What I'm doing is using .NET libraries to make the determination of what subdomains exist under a domain. So this is invoke DNS enumeration. And I'm persisting this to a variable because there's a lot of fun we're going to have with this after the fact. We're going to chain a bunch of commands here. So I want to go into cybersecurity pen tester land. I want to determine what things exist on an endpoint. Is there admin dot domain name? Is there API dot domain name? And then from there, I would start looking at those things, port scanning them, and whatever else. Well, starting with DNS, I have seen at various places there are DNS records that people did not know were DNS. There are DNS records that people did not know existed. By the way, Darius, that's actually, that exact example is in my, I have something very similar to that in my README, very close to that. So at this point, I want to take a peek, take a pulse on what things exist on this domain. So what invoke DNS enumeration returns to me is the host name and then the corresponding IP address. And what's interesting is you can see that there are 2 different IP addresses for the same host name in this case. And while that's interesting, what's more interesting is I can take the results of that, and this is going to take a little bit, so we're going to pivot over to another topic. I can take the results of that, and I'm expecting these to only be listening on 80 and 443. So I'm going to do where connected. That's it. And I'm going to call this results, and we're going to jump to another topic because this is going to take a little while to cook. So what I'm doing here, and I'll reiterate it when we come back, what I'm doing here is I'm starting and I'm basically looking at the top level domain. I want to see what hosts are listening on it. Then I'm taking the result of that DNS enumeration and I'm piping it to test TCP connection to do a default port scan, and I'm returning only what exists. Then from there, if I were a pen tester, I would start looking at exploiting those things. Now, we can even stop before the scary bad pen tester thing and say, that's odd. I didn't expect SSH to be open on the server. That's weird. I didn't expect SQL to be open on the server. This really could be an audit tool. Above and beyond everything else, what I'm doing is a basic audit. I'm expecting X and I'm getting Y, both positive and negative. So like I was talking to Mike about in the positive sense, well, semi-positive, depending on how much you like being at SunGuard doing DR exercises, I'm expecting these things to be open. And if they're not, that's bad. In another sense, I'm expecting things to not be open. It goes both ways. So when we're talking security testing, why this isn't entitled, a security testing module, that's effectively what it is. Yeah, known good state. Makes a ton of sense. We're going to come back to this because this is going to take a little bit because I'm hitting these nodes with multiple ports. And let me see what I had in the other window. I have quite a few other things to show. Just give me a moment. Nope. We've already done that. What else? Let me just take a peek back at my HTTP response headers. This one is something that you're going to see. So pen testers, I don't want to beat them up too bad, but I had an experience with a really good pen tester. I worked with a pen tester who used to work in the NSA at my last organization. He had a certification called the OSCP, really gnarly certification. If you want to get into pen testing, definitely check that out. But basically, he had worked a lot with pen testers in the past, and one of the things he told me is that pen testers a lot of times will bloat their findings, right? They'll effectively, if a pen tester is struggling, so your company pays a lot of money for pen testing or red team engagements. And if they can't find stuff, it's very bad for them. They have to demonstrate their value by finding things. They're incentivized to find stuff. In his view, not saying it's mine, but to be fair, I've seen exactly this, so I guess it is my view. I've seen pen testers bloat their findings from what we would pretty much expect. Like if we're doing an internal risk assessment, oh, this is a low or a medium, you'd see them escalate like they escalate their lows to mediums and mediums to highs and so on and so forth. Which gets very annoying because again, as cybersecurity people, professionals, what we want to do is focus our efforts on the things that are effectively increasing risk in an organization to an undesirable level. Not just closing off stuff because we can. That's not cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is predicated upon risk management, so we want to find things that really matter, that are actually things that are increasing our risk surface. So one of the things that I would see that would come up on pen test reports or things that would be flagged by various DAST solutions, if you've used those, or things like Tenable, is response headers. Oh my God, this response header is bad, that response header is bad. And you're expecting a specific response. And yes, I've done threat modeling and explain Stride to developers. By the way, I'm in the process of, and I know that this is gonna like bother some people, I'm in the process of developing my own, I'm saying my own, I hate saying this, but I'm developing a threat model that's a more simplified version based on the CIA triad. specifically, because explaining Stride to people and getting developers to chime in, like to basically understand that, is painful. But if we're talking confidentiality, integrity, availability, which is the cornerstone of all cybersecurity, there are no more principles other than that. They all inherit from that, regardless of what people tell you. I can then get people to understand where risk actually is. But yes, done Stride, Dread, all those sort of things. So, but that doesn't matter when we're talking about vulnerability reports. In any case, you'll see response header coming back to, oh, I'm expecting this response header, I'm expecting that response header, so on and so forth. That becomes a thing that we're chasing down, which is effectively a waste of time. So we can either, okay, this is dumb, I'm not going to do this, or it's coming up in a vulnerability report, we're going to have to deal with it. Where this next command came from was, I want automated testing again. I'm against these targets that I'm either deploying in Azure or wherever else. I'm expecting this list of response headers, and I'm not expecting this. It's the same thing with test TCP connection. There's positive responses I want, there's negative responses I don't want, and we're going to wrap that in pester. So this one is simply called get HTTP response header. And I believe, does this take URL as well? Okay, yeah, it does. It takes a URL and it takes a URL as a system.uri object, and it takes a host name. And it returns you response headers. And this is not terribly exciting because he does not have that much response headers. But what you can see with, as an example, if we were to go to this company, who produces a wonderful firewall, we can see that they have a server of Cloudflare. Where this works is, say, as an example, I want all my company's public websites and APIs to be behind Cloudflare. If I want to put everything behind Cloudflare, I also want to verify that everything is behind Cloudflare. Now, if I have to manage 150 websites, and again, I don't know what those are, I can run test TCP connection, scan an entire subnet, pipe it to this, and determine, is server Cloudflare? Now, granted, this can be forged. You can say whatever you want, but is server Cloudflare? Or on the other side, I don't want to advertise that I'm running some antiquated version of IIS or Apache or whatever else. So this is effectively fingerprinting. And yes, this is a bare bones HTTP request. It's effectively just a wrapper. A lot of these are quality of life convenience things. This is a wrapper around invoke web request. It just made it life easy for me because I kept doing invoke web request and getting the response headers. Oh yeah, one other thing about this guy is that we have a if you like hash tables for whatever reason, which if you don't use hash tables in PowerShell, you should feel very bad. You should. We can get it as a hash table as well, which might be useful if you're looking for keys and values and whatever else. But the default is a PS object. And last but not least, before we pivot back to the prior thing, this is so I have, as an example, say I have a pile of IP addresses. And I'm looking at, I don't know, as an example, outbound firewall logs. And I'm seeing lots and lots and lots. I'm going to run this one because it's going to take a minute. I'll explain why it takes a literal minute. I'm going to parse that file and make the determination that my egress traffic is what I expect it to be. Not, oh, this server is communicating with some place it should not. I'd like to geolocate the addresses that I'm seeing egress in the firewall log. I'd like to know what they are, what country, postal code, all that sort of stuff. So this is get IP information. It's a wrapper around the whatismyip.com API. And yes, I have seen other ones that return whois information, but they are not doing what this does. And the reason why I've got write progress here and why it's taking a minute is because you can only make a request a minute. So I had to effectively throttle it. So yes, it's slow, but if you let it run over time, you're going to get some good information back like we're about to see. You can see if stuff is in a foreign country that you do not want traffic going to a specific country. You can see that. And from there, you can make various decisions as to what you should and should not block. So this is a pure cybersecurity thing. We can see I'm querying the Google DNS server. We can see it's in beautiful Mountain View, California. Never been. I'm sure it's a wonderful place. ISP is Google, but this will return ISPs from all over the world. And let's pivot back to the other one, see if we're done. And we are done with this one. So I'm going to revisit this. We have, I'm Joe Pentester. I am going to test my friend's domain. I'm invoking DNS enumeration. We found he has vm.node4.io. That's pretty interesting. That might be problematic. So let's run a port scan against all of that. So I'm going to take the results of the DNS enumeration and I'm going to pipe it to test TCP connection. And lo and behold, we have some ports and these are the ports that are open. oh my goodness, he has Postgres exposed to the world. And he totally didn't do it just for this demo to make life easy for me. But he has a couple of things that we don't want to see. So what I would do in this case, I don't care about 80 and 443. So I'm going to say we're port. Let's go longhand. I haven't done this at a dog's age. Let's go port not equal to 80. And we don't care about 80 and we don't care about 443. So say this is a much larger list. Or if I'm doing it correctly, port.
You could say not in array.
That's better. I like that. Let's go with that one. Not in. Yeah, thank you.
Me too, Sean. I was typing it in chat.
Thank you. I learned something tonight. You know, I've done that before, and I just completely forgot. So let's go there, close that. Probably. Yeah, there we go. And that's our problem. That's our problem, child. Right there. Yeah, not in. I love that. Way better. Way, way, way better. So I'm finding that these are exposed, and this would be a problem. So on a pen test or like some kind of an audit, Postgres exposed to the outside world, super duper bad, and SSH kind of bad. We want to close those things out. And that is every function in the module. Does anybody have any questions?
No question. Just I need a drink. Oof. That was
I
awesome.
think I think it's like information overload in a good way. Yeah.
And
I think
go to the if you're interested in what I presented, yeah, pull requests are encouraged and accepted as long as the code's good. And the other thing, because I've gotten some strange pull requests for one of my other modules, but in any event, check out the README. There's a lot of good info in there. This integrates very well with the Active Directory module. You can use it internally, externally. PowerShell 7.2, I think, is the minimum requirement. Will run on Windows 10, 11, Mac OS. This is Linux, etc. And I see a hand up from somebody, but I can't see who that somebody is.
Darius.
Darius, did you say?
Yeah.
Darius, you can come off mute or ask in chat and we'll.
Hi, Darius. And you're on mute, Darius.
We'll come back to him. Maybe he's oh no.
How noisy is this in an enterprise network? I don't think.
Good question. So noisy enough if you're doing a port scan, but what was super fun, I'm not mentioning the company, it's not the one I work at now. They had a big thing where you can't run Nmap. You cannot run Nmap. You should not run Nmap, and you cannot do port scans with Nmap. Well, I just found I'm going to build my own, and I did, and I have not been detected with it. But I mean, it's noisy. I mean, you're going to see, like, if you're looking at this from a network perspective and you're seeing a single PC blasting out TCP connections, it's noisy enough. We'll put it that way. But if they're looking for an Nmap binary, this will work better for that. Like, you'll be kind of under the radar. But yes, it's noisy enough. Test TCP connection is noisy, but it's not noisy if you're okay. Let me be clear. Test TCP connection if you're hitting 1 to 2 ports is not that noisy. It's going to look like you're just basically like doing basic traffic. A full-on port scan, so test TCP connection with no arguments, that's noisy.
You can also hide that with get random and add some sleep and intermittent randomcy to it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had the same problem. They won't let me use Nmap, so then we just scan the whole network with custom PowerShell.
Yeah, this will do it. And the ports random, they're in numeric order. Like least to most.
And you can give it the ports that you want, right? So you can just make your own port.
You could create a randomized list of ports if you truly wanted to.
Yeah. And pass that around. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. When somebody asked if it was in order, it's not in sequential order. It's not like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's specific ports. IPv6. It's a good question. I have seen it return. So here's what's interesting. I've hit host names that have resolved to an IPv6 address, but I'm not taking an IPv6 IP, and I have not tried that, and I don't know if that will work. I'm just surprised IPv6 never became a thing. It doesn't feel like it became a thing, but it should become a thing. It needs to become a thing.
Great question about the site for suites. Yeah, I noticed that you had the ones that were available. Sometimes there are some that are deprecated. Do you have the ability to return the entire list that's supported by its endpoint or server?
No, it's just the ones that it negotiates on. So what's happening with quality, it seems to be the ones that it's only negotiating on, and a lot of that is, so one of the challenges here from what I found out is it's predicated upon, and this is going to go to the TLS conversation as well, it's predicated upon what the PC can do, like the computer you're launching it from. So it's not going to return everything that the server can support. It's going to return negotiated ones, which is why I call the property, I'm going to bring it up right now.
Get TLS cipher suite.
I called it negotiated cipher. Negotiated cipher suites. So the other thing is too, and why I'm demonstrating this on my Linux computer instead of my MacBook, again, dependent on what your source computer is allowing. For whatever reason on Mac OS, I'm scanning a site, like my company site. I'm like, this should be TLS 1.3. It's an API endpoint. And on a MacBook, so I'm testing from the outside. The MacBook is saying it's not TLS 1.3. I'm getting false. I'm like, that is really odd. That shouldn't be. When I test it from a Linux VM on the MacBook, I get TLS 1.3. The point is, you're at the mercy of the computer you're launching it from, if that makes sense. So no, it's not going to return all of the cipher suites on the target. And again, for the TLS testing, your computer needs to be able to speak that. Mac OS was very weird with TLS 1.3, I think until recently, and I have no idea why, and I didn't have the patience nor time to figure out why.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. Any other questions? I can't see if anybody has their hand raised or not, though.
No, I think we're good here, Tony. I think a fair amount of people are suffering from information overload here. Right? There's a lot of wonderful information.
Well, it's a security purpose that makes people suffer.
Yeah,
it's a tool of the trade.
Is it using the native TCP connect in the background instead of the testnet connection? Then are you just using the .NET native?
It's .NET. Yeah, it's native .NET in the background, because it was developed an eternity ago. And when I look at the code, I kind of cringe, but it works. And when I say it works, I'm going to be clear about this. I make it, if my code is throwing an unhandled exception, that's an abject failure. So it works in that it will not throw unhandled exceptions and do weird stuff like that. But yes, native old school .NET. Or I guess it's kind of new because this is on the later versions of .NET. But yeah, pure .NET.
I'm just really amazed you've really found a way to surface up information that's not trivial to find sometimes, and through some simple commandlets, you really get back a really good suite of information that's useful, right? So it's not where you use a built-in command and you get back pages of information and you have to page through all that data to find this, and this is what it means. You have the cipher suites right there on the bottom, right? And it tells you what's going and what's not. So it's a lot of really useful information presented in a way that's easy to digest.
I forgot something super important. I forgot one of the most important things about this. This guy, let me go here, back to my friend's site. So get TLS, I'm assuming, I'm not going to assume this, subject alternative names on certificates. This is a big, big, big deal. And unfortunately, I don't have it. I can't demo this now, but trust me, I have done this. So a subject alternative name is another way that a website is identified, right? There's what you're going to see with certificates, with TLS certificates. You can have, all right, say it's www.facebook.com, but then I want facebook.com, www.facebook.com, www.fb.com, whatever it is. Like I want multiple names to resolve to the same website. So you'll have a subject, which is typically like the first thing that people will go to for the website, but then you will have alternative names or mistyped names or whatever else, something called the subject alternative name. So let's go back to hacking, recon. I want to find things and stuff. I would take the results of this. Now, in this case, my friend only has a subject alternative name that's identical to the subject. But I have seen subject alternative name lists go wildly crazy and a lot of times not have any relevance to the domain that the subject is based on. So what you can do with something like this is do select expand subject alternative names and then test against those for whatever. Now let's go 443. So at this point, if I want to do further reconnaissance, I hit this core website. I then peek into the subject alternative names. I found new targets. Then at that point, yeah, cheap way of sharing a cert. You know what's the worst way, Jason? Something called a wildcard certificate. If you don't know why those are bad, please read. That's a subject unto itself. And by the way, this will tell you if you got wildcard certs or not. But in this case, I would hit a cert. Wildcard certs are cheaper because you can deploy them everywhere. That's the problem. You can deploy that same cert everywhere to do the same thing. And a wildcard cert is effectively, for those that don't know, *domain name. So in this case, if I had a TLS certificate that had multiple subject alternative names, I get the TLS info, get the subject alternative names, and then test against all of those. And then I can, again, it's getting kind of circular, bring that back to get TLS information, tailor it at the end, get response headers, whatever. In other words, I can find many, many, many things. This is a good investigation tool. So it's an investigation tool, but it's also a really solid testing tool. At least in my experience, it's helped preserve my sanity, or what's left of it at this point. And that is the last piece. I can't believe I forgot the subject alternative name ones, because that's a big bad one.
All right. So we've had some pretty robust conversation going on throughout the entire evening here. And I think we've reached a point where people have sufficiently had all their questions answered. Phil, any closing thoughts here? I mean, a lot of information to digest.
No, yeah, certainly. And I was just thinking the subject alternative names is just the finding out who's using other names for sites that shouldn't be. So that's also part of that point. Is that why did you get tell me all the places and all the subject alternative names or the SAN names that you can use, because that's been not necessarily exploited, but they're just not doing the right things in the back.
Well, and it uncovers, a lot of times back in, well, I guess it still happens for people that have on-prem Exchange, people a lot of times would try to use the same cert externally and internally. And so in that SAN, you would see all the internal host names of their servers, kind of a bad security practice.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And that point is like, hey, you should only be doing these. And then you come up with all these funky names, and like, we don't want to be sharing that.
And whoever said that, that's a key thing with penetration testing, the reconnaissance phase, like finding things, exposing internal details of an internal, like of a network. That's a problem. And yes, that is a big thing with that. So again, if you want SANs, it's get TLS information. That is not on get TLS certificate. You can get them, but it's a pain. Get TLS information, gives them to you on a silver platter, gives them to you as an array.
Nice. All right. Well, again, thanks, Tony, for sharing this with us. And I know that, as we spoke before, you can watch Tony's other recording that he did at the PowerShell Summit at half speed, as he describes it, because it's a whirlwind of information. And I certainly think that not a small number of people will be watching this again at half speed, because you do a phenomenal job, and I appreciate you coming and sharing with us. And there's an open invitation for some of the other modules, because we can certainly talk about that too. So
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Yeah, so Tony, thank you so much for sharing. It's been really wonderful. I just want to send a quick reminder for our friends who are watching at home on YouTube. You can always join us in person. Head over to rtpsug.com or find us on Meetup. Those same letters. The value of coming in person is you get to ask the questions and interact with the presenters. And so we hope you come and join us at the next one. You can also check out the YouTube channel. We have about 150 videos on various topics related to PowerShell. So we hope you'll check that out. Tony, thanks so much for doing this. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. I want to say once again, thank you to Tony, and thank you everyone for watching tonight. We'll see you next time.